What is up, guys? We are about 2 months away from college football actually starting on the field. And so today I decided I was going to rank every team from every conference. Well, not just today. I'm going to do that throughout the next few videos. But today we are looking at the SEC, the conference that is home to my alma mater, UGA. Go Dogs. And yeah, basically how this is going to work is I'm going to take a look at every single team in order, ranking them. And then as I get to each team, I'm going to kind of discuss what is good and bad about their team, what I expect from them. Basically, just an overall deep dive breakdown of each team as I get to them, but also ranking them from best to worst. Starting out with my team, the Georgia Bulldogs. I don't think this is just my bias. Georgia's been the most dominant team in the SEC, arguably. Alabama's been really good too, but Georgia, I think, is the top dog in the conference. Obviously, they had a lot of guys leave for the NFL, as they have the past few years, but I think Kirby Smart has really proved that Georgia is really well equipped to reload without much of a quality dip at all. I think that there's insane depth on the roster. Injury is not really as much of a concern because the 2s and 3s are also really elite. And a lot of our players can rest and not be worn out by the end of the game by plugging and playing in new players that are just as good, maybe a little bit less good, but a lot of them are really, really solid players. So I think depth really helps. I won't really talk about injury too much, but I do want to hit on depth because I think it is something that's really important to teams and could really change the outcome of a lot of games, because if players aren't worn out and if there's good backings behind them, if injury does arise, it's not going to be as big of an issue for Georgia than it is going to be for some other teams. So obviously with Georgia, there's also a really, really incredible culture and just overall super proven brand that's been there for the past few years. I think Kirby Smart has really earned his place among the top of the SEC. We have Carson Beck as our quarterback. I think he's going to be a Heisman contender. He's got a ton of weapons around him. There's an incredible staff that is only boosted with the addition of Travaris Robinson from Alabama. I think that's an incredible pickup for us. And yeah, I think Carson Beck is going to have a really great year. He had a really great year last year, and he can only go up. I mean, he could go down, I guess, but I don't expect that to be the case at all. I do expect him to be a Heisman contender and just a really, really solid quarterback that can get Georgia to the top where I think they will be. Obviously, we had the addition of Trevor Etienne, an excellent running back that when I was watching him at the spring game, I realized he was also a really good pass catcher. So I think that's a really good dual threat type of guy. Obviously, when we lost guys like Brock Bowers that can do that kind of stuff. And even though Trevor Etienne's not a tight end, I think that he will play a kind of role where he's a running back and pass catcher, and I think he'll be really solid at that. Overall, I think there's just elite talent across the board with Georgia. There's almost no offensive weaknesses that I can determine this early in the season. Obviously, we are after spring, so no transfers are going in and out. And from what I can tell, there's not really any offensive weaknesses that I could pick up. The defense is more experienced, and I think it should be a lot. I think it should be better than last year's unit, to be honest. I don't think there's a lot of question marks on the team as a whole. They're good enough to mask any of that with depth, and I think that the traditional points of weakness due to new players on big roles doesn't really apply as much to Georgia, because like I said earlier, Georgia is good at developing and reloading. So where there are spots where we don't know how a player is going to perform, I can usually assume that Georgia is going to have that player ready to go by the time he plays on Saturday. My only real question is how the defensive line will hold up against mobile quarterbacks. Obviously, that was a problem for Georgia in the past, especially last year with Jalen Milroe. I think that we've had an overall just a difficult time defending those type of threats, and yeah, I think that our defense didn't really get as much penetration last year. So time will tell if that changes. I think it will, and I think obviously the defensive unit as a whole is incredible. So if it even is an issue, I think it will be a minor issue. So now moving on to who I think will be the number 2 team in the conference, and that is the Texas Longhorns, new addition to the SEC. I think they possibly have the best quarterback in the country. I think he's just on the edge of his breakout season. I think this year will be that for him. They had some transfers come in, Isaiah Bond, And Amari Niblack from Alabama, I think, will really help their pass catching ability because they did lose some big guys. And they so like I said, yeah, they lost some major pieces, and some areas will probably decline, like the defensive tackle position. However, the portal additions just they're really good. I think they'll be really good, and we'll just have to see how that pans out. And the new additions do lead me to believe that they will be stronger in the secondary, and I think they'll have a really nasty pass rush this next season, from what I can tell. I think they have a really, really good head coach in Steve Sarkisian. I think he's an excellent offensive mind that will be able to scheme up some really, really, really good offensive stuff. I think they also have a really solid depth. And yeah, they lost a lot of guys, but I think that they are also a team that can reload. And I think Texas will be a better team than they were last year overall, which, there's not too far much higher they can go. They were already in the playoffs, so if they're even just a little bit better, that's a win because the playoff is an expanded field, so they could definitely make the playoffs again. And I think it would be more likely that they do make it than don't make it. And I think they're a contender for the national championship this year, actually. Now to number 3, a team that's not normally this high up in SEC rankings, but this year I think they're going to be really solid, and that's Ole Miss. Um, we're in the upper tier of the SEC, and with the investment, like they were already there, but they didn't quite breach that upper echelon of the SEC, like the Georgias and the Alabamas. So I think that with just a little bit more investment that they've put in, they just have a real shot of skyrocketing. I know that they lost their big running back. But they went portal crazy. They picked up a ton of high quality players. They already have an incredible quarterback room that's led by a mobile quarterback in Jackson Dart. He's a dual threat. I think they have a really solid wide receiver room. They got Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, and they got Juice Wells. And I think they have a very deep and talented tight end room. So on offense, I think they're going to be insane. Lane Kiffin always has a great offense, but the defense is what seems to need to be improving most of the time. But I do think this year that they did improve massively. I think they're going to have like a mercenary style of defense. It should just be a big improvement with transfers. And the reason I say mercenary is because there's a lot of transfers on that defensive side of the ball. And you never know what can happen, but I do think they're going to be much better. And just a little bit of tweak on the defense can really turn that team around already. I know Quinton Judkins is not there anymore, but I think they'll be just fine on offense. And I don't think they're super deep on defense. I will say that. So they do have good players, but I don't think they're super good on defense or deep on defense. So if they have some injuries, they could run into some trouble. But especially early in the year, I think they're going to be really good. And if they can stay healthy, they'll be a really, really solid team that can also contend for a national championship. But yeah, overall, I think it's just upgrades across the board on both sides of the ball. So I expect them to be a really incredible team. So at number 4, I have Tennessee. I know Tennessee on most people's lists is not this high, but I'm really high on Nico Iamaleava. I think he is going to be an incredible, this is his first year starting. I think he's going to have an incredible breakout year. I think that this should be the best offense we see under Josh Heupel, and there are some question marks along the offensive line, which is why, which is not really what you want for a quarterback that's brand new to your team. I mean, he's not necessarily a freshman, but this is his first year starting, so I do have some questions about that, but they have a really deep and solid wide receiver room. I think James Pierce and the rest of the defense also looks really solid. I mean, last year they were a really underrated defense, and this year I think they're going to be also really incredible. They do have questions along the secondary that I do think will be better, but I don't know how much better they will be. But I think they seem to be more athletic and faster in that area, so we will have to wait and see. At number 5, it pains me to believe that Alabama is still in the top 5 of the SEC. They don't have Nick Saban, but I am super high on Kalen DeBoer and the staff that he put together there. Possibly one of the best in the country. Like I said, they did lose Robinson to Georgia, which was a hit, but I think overall that staff is really incredible. And from the looks of it, Alabama is able to recruit and get transfer players in there. So I don't know if we're going to see much of a dip from them. They have Jalen Milroe at quarterback, who was inconsistent last year, but he has a lot of upside. So in a Kalen DeBoer system, he could be really scary because Kalen DeBoer, you saw what he did with Michael Penix. Yeah, I think Jalen Milroe is going to be a really important player, and it'll probably be what makes or breaks the team. And there's better depth around him as well. I think there's lots of pieces that were lost in the portal, like Isaiah Bond, and the biggest hit of all, in my opinion, Caleb Downs, one of the best defensive players in the country. They lost some running back talent, but I think they have a really solid room with Justice Haynes and Jam Miller leading the pack. And although those weren't really starters last year, I watched them in the SEC Championship, and I think they may actually be an improvement over last year. And only time can tell that as well. The wide receiver room is also a bit of a question mark for me. There's not really many remaining starters. I don't really know who's going to be catching balls for them for the most part. There's a lot of potential in the room, but I know I'm going to keep an eye on Jermaine Bernard. But this could be a weakness if the Tide does not have a standout wide receiver. On the offensive line side of the ball, I think it should be greatly improved under center and just overall transfer additions that Kalen DeBoer added and his track record with offensive lines and the offense in general. I think that they're going to be completely good on the offensive line, way better than they were last year. I'm not going to bring up kickers much in this video, but they did lose Reichard, which was one of the most incredible kickers in college football. He was their scoring leader, but they did replace him with who was considered the best kicker last year. So Alabama should be able to score from further back in the field, which is an underrated advantage in my opinion. As for the defense, I think cornerback's obviously a question mark with the loss of elite talent, and the replacements that they added were, I don't think, super experienced, but the secondary also looks to be the weakest link of the team. But we will see if if in the fall that team is able to shape up. I don't know. We'll see. The secondary does look pretty shaky for me. Defensive line, on the other hand, is very experienced, and I think they should definitely stand out for the Tide. The linebackers are also a bright spot for the team. So I think that when it comes to the run game, they'll be really solid. Defending passes, we'll just have to wait and see. And at number 6, we have LSU. Now, they lost their Heisman-winning quarterback. However, Garrett Nussmeier is a very underrated quarterback in my eyes. He can sling the rock. However, he does not bring the same mobile threat that Daniels did. So we'll have to wait and see how his style of ball performs for the Tigers. But, I saw him in the SEC Championship, and he was really slinging it. So I think he's going to be a really solid quarterback for LSU. I just don't know how dynamic he will be able to be for them. Also, they had elite talent leave in the wide receiver room in Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. I definitely think it's hard to replace that talent, but Kyron Lacey should be a step in the right direction. In the running back room is also a bit iffy for me. I don't expect much from that group. There is talent in the room, but they seem a bit thin. Josh Williams seems to be the starter, and he does have experience, but overall I think the run game will be fine, not great or terrible. They do have a solid tight end with Mason Tyler, and I think they will be really strong on the offensive line, but I'm not sure if this offense – actually, I'm pretty positive this offense is not going to be what we saw last year. I think it'll still be good. I just don't think it will be elite like it was last year. And the biggest question is obviously the defense. Last year they were terrible. They have drastically changed the staff for the better. They didn't change much of the athlete, the talent there, so I don't know how much the staff can really fix the problems that were there. But we'll have to see. I do think they drastically improved in that area as far as staff goes, and they should at least be better because of that. I think they'll improve, but I don't know to what degree. At defensive tackle, they're weak. At secondary, they're weak unless the staff can improve. Harold Perkins is the bright spot. He should continue to be incredible. I think that without Daniels, Neighbors, and Thomas, I just really expect regression. They might even be a little too high now that I'm rereading my notes, because the next team I do think is a really solid team that might be better, and that's Missouri. Missouri last year took a huge jump in quality that I think can't be understated, and I don't think it was just a temporary flash. I mean, I think they were a really solid team last year. They returned their quarterback and their wide receiver one. They did lose Cody Schrader at running back, So I'm unsure of their running back room, but I think that they will be able to develop well. I think that it's likely that they can do again with their current running backs, Noel and Carroll. Both transfers, so the position is up in the air. They could go either way. They really developed Schrader well, so I'm hopefully they can develop them really well too. But I tend to think that it's going to be a step back. But I mean, you got to remember, Cody Schrader was not a super high ranked prospect coming out of high school, so it might just be a really good development team back there that's able to create these monster running backs. If they aren't as productive on the ground, though, at least they will be through the air because their wide receiver room is experienced and it's very good. As I mentioned before, Luther Burden is a stud, a possible Bolitnikov winner, I think, and the rest of the cast should be really solid as well. They have a really solid offensive line, and overall, I think that the offensive unit as a whole will improve. On defense, they did lose some players that were big for them last year, and this is an area I think that is probably my biggest question going into the year. Their defensive line will be fine and mostly similar to last year, maybe a bit worse, but I think the real question is in their secondary and linebacker positions. They lost a lot, and I don't know if the replacements will be able to fill in quite as well. They did portal in some guys to address the issue, so I'm not worried as I was before the spring and before the transfer portal opened in general, but I do still have questions along that front. So at number 8, I have Texas A&M. I think that their biggest advantage is honestly the change of coach. I really like the Mike Elko hire, and I think it will see immediate returns for A&M despite losing a lot of players. I think Elko is a really solid solid coach, and I think that Jimbo Fisher was just not it for A&M. I think that they're going to have a hit or miss offense. Obviously, they have Connor Wigman back. Hopefully, he stays healthy. We'll have to just wait and see. But yeah, along the offensive line, there's definitely a question mark there. Lots of departures, but I think the unit was also not great last year, so the replacements of these players could really be positive. Defensive line got depleted as well, so I'm not super confident in that position either. There is potential, but not a ton of experience, so we will have to wait and see. They have a strong and deep running back room, very strong. I expect them to be able to pound the rock. The wide receiver room is also pretty strong for the first string. There is depth concerns, I think. Injuries could really hurt A&M, so I think wide receiver is actually a weakness when depth is considered. If they're all healthy, I think they have a really strong trio of wide receivers, and I definitely think it will be a run-first team despite that because of the depth. The team did portal a lot in and a lot out, so it will look very different than the team that they had last year. And outside of the line, I think that A&M should be fine. I think the line of scrimmage is going to be where they struggle. I don't see anything special. I think that overall they'll be worse on defense, but not bad. I think A&M will definitely be better than they were last year, but it's a hard team to pin down because of how different they will look. So we'll have to wait and see together. So picking back up with Oklahoma. Now, they have Jackson Arnold at quarterback. He looks like a stud, especially since he was able to push out a really solid Dylan Gabriel. I think he's a really, really solid first-time starter. He did start in the bowl game last year, and we did see some really high highs and some really low lows. But I expect over the offseason he got better and will be able to fix some of his mistakes. Offensive line, I think, is their biggest question mark, obviously. Probably an outright weakness for them. I don't really think that they have a good offensive line. It's a pretty glaring issue for me, which is why they're lower than they should be. It's almost entirely new and stitched together. I just don't think that that's going to be a great unit. And after the spring game, I don't think I'm very confident in that. I think that my assumptions were correct. I think they are a pretty weak offensive line. The running back room I do expect to be fine. Nothing special. Same with tight end. Nothing jumps out to me. Outside of Jackson Arnold at quarterback, the other big offensive strength is the wide receiver room. Deion Burks is a monster. I think he's going to have a breakout season, and he's just one of the many names Oklahoma has at wide receiver. It's a really, really good and really deep room, so keep an eye out for that. But their usefulness will obviously be dependent on how that line can hold up and if they can give Arnold enough space, enough time to make connections, which we're going to have to wait and see. Venables is the head coach, so it's time to start expecting great defenses, and I think Oklahoma has a great potential on that side of the ball. The defensive line looks really solid up front. The linebackers are a huge strength for Oklahoma. Safeties look really solid as well. Same with cornerback. But they do need to stay healthy because they are a bit thin in depth. Overall, I think this will be a classic Venables defense that will hopefully buy time for the offense. If Oklahoma can figure out O-line, this team can really shoot up. They could definitely be a sleeper team if that is the case. At number 10, I have the Florida Gators, and I struggle putting them here because I think that they might be a little bit lower depending on the teams, how the teams below them play. But I think that they do have a deeper room with Mertz returning and Lagway backing him up. I think that Lagway will be a much better position for the coming years, but that's not what we're talking about right now. Mertz was decent at Florida, should be decent again, maybe a bit better. I think some people are a little bit higher on Mertz than I am, but Florida did lose Etienne at running back to the portal and Pearsall to the draft. Etienne gone does really hurt, but there are plenty of weapons in the running back room for Florida, including their leading rusher, Montrell Johnson. There's potential for the pass catching positions, but they're a bit thin there as well. No true standouts at wide receiver. Not a position group that really excites me for this upcoming season. The offensive line is a question mark at Florida, as it is with Oklahoma. Not quite as bad as Oklahoma, but I just don't see Florida being a very good offense, to be honest. I think that they will rely on their defense, which does look to see improvements. Secondary especially looks really improved with the portal additions, and the line should be improved as well. Florida is currently struggling with injuries, so there's a lot of questions I have for this team, but I think that I won't bring in schedules too much, but Florida could be a really solid team and still have a hard time with the schedule that they have. At number 11 is Kentucky. They brought in Brock Vandergriff at quarterback, which should be big for the Wildcats. I've seen him play at Georgia in very sparing moments, and he's really, really good. He's got a cannon for an arm, and he's got really, really solid legs to match. They are surprisingly solid at running back even after the loss of Ray Davis. They got Chip Trayanum. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he should be a great addition to the team, and they should be pretty good on the ground, especially when including Vandergriff's ground abilities. That is also depending on the line, though. Speaking of which, the O-line does have some solid pieces and some transfer pieces that we'll have to wait and see about. And it's pretty solid receivers as well as 3 solid tight ends. Overall, the offense is pretty good. I don't think any position here is really elite, but there's no super glaring weaknesses either. And I think same goes for the defense. There looks to be a bright spot in the secondary, but overall the defense seems to be solid, not bad or elite. They definitely could be above Florida. That's just we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But I do think that this year in Napier's system, Florida will be a bit better. But I think those are pretty close teams in quality. At number 12, we have Auburn. Peyton Thorne is back, for better or for worse. I think for worse. He doesn't really impress me, and I think a lot of freshman players are going to have to start across the team. Lots of potential, but obviously unproven and likely not really ready to start. Cam Coleman could be a really incredible wide receiver. I think he will be. But again, he's a freshman, so I expect a bit of inconsistency with some flashes of greatness. And I think the room around him is not the strongest, so I think it will be the Cam Coleman show. Returners like the tight end, Rivaldo Fairweather and Jerquez Hunter should be really solid for the team. They should be improved on O-line. They're not the most experienced, but I think Auburn is going to see offensive improvement. As far as the defense, I do think that their defense is pretty inexperienced as well across the board, so that will be a big question mark for them. And they have a few transfers, but I feel like the defense will be their biggest weakness. So we'll see. At number 13, I have South Carolina. I love Shane Beamer, but this team is kind of low this year for me. I think they lost a lot of guys, including Spencer Rattler at quarterback and Juice Wells and Xavier Legette at wide receiver. They do have Lenora Sellers at quarterback now, and I think he's a solid replacement. And they did attempt to address the wide receiver problem in the portal, so we'll have to see how that pans out. I do think that they did a decent job adding depth to that wide receiver position that they did not have last year. They definitely landed some solid options at running back that really could help them elevate. And I think that offensive line is still a question mark as it was last year. Teams were just able to get so much pressure and really sack the quarterback a lot. Last year is obviously just one of their biggest weaknesses, if not, it was their biggest weakness. I do think the ceiling is higher for their current unit, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. The other side of the ball, I think, will be solid. I think they have really decent depth at the line, and I expect the unit to be just overall really solid. Lots of potential at linebacker. Still some questions, but overall should be a solid group, and I expect South Carolina to perform better than last year despite the players leaving, but there are areas that really need to pan out for that to be the case. So with all those questions, I had to put them at 13. At number 14, I have the Arkansas Razorbacks. Offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino was hired. That's really the biggest move for the whole team because the offense really rests in his hands. Almost anything is better than last year's performance. They did lose their quarterback, KJ Jefferson, and a lot of players that were huge. So it's really scary for offense for me. Taylon Green has a lot of potential. Had a few highlights when he was at Boise State, but he's not KJ Jefferson. I don't think he's going to be as good of a quarterback for Arkansas. Definitely a downgrade there, and a few question marks as to how he will fit into Arkansas's offense. I'm not super confident in him. There's plenty of questions at the wide receiver room. I don't know how any of the guys are going to end up playing. I don't know how they're going to look. It's really up to Petrino to turn that offense around as a whole. It was a group that wasn't solid last year, so the offense doesn't have. I mean, it can only get better, I would think, and it's really in Bobby Petrino's hands. On defense, Arkansas looks to have a really strong defensive line, probably their biggest strength of the team. There's not a lot of experience at the linebacker position, but again, plenty of potential. And I think their secondary is also a solid unit. I really don't think defense will be Arkansas's problem this year. I'm not super confident that in their offense, though, and I think they'll definitely be a pound-the-ball type of team with short passes mixed in. I do think they will live or die by whether Petrino can have success on his side of the ball. At number 15, we have Mississippi State. Obviously, we have a new coach in Jeff Lebby, who I expect to be good in the long run, but I think that he's going to have some growing pains starting out. And he's never coached at the highest position before. He's never been a head coach. So we'll see how he starts off his first year. They did get Blake Shapen, who's a solid veteran quarterback. He doesn't have a super high ceiling, but he should at least be decent. They should get decent quarterback play out of him. Overall, the offense should be better than it was because there's not much worse that they can get, to be honest. Lots of transfers that will start on offense, so we'll have to see how that pans out as well. Defense did lose a lot of production, and honestly, it feels really hard to know what Mississippi State will be, considering there's so many new things going on there, new staff, new players. But at the end of the day, I think they'll be decent on offense and struggle heavily on defense. So yeah, I'm just not very confident in Mississippi State as a team. And last, and probably least, it's Vanderbilt because, well, they're Vanderbilt. They do have two transfer quarterbacks, and we don't really know which one is going to start. All four of their best receivers left for the transfer portal, so things don't look good as far as talent goes on the offensive side of the ball. They did, however, hire a new offensive coordinator from New Mexico State, and that should lead to some really unique and unusual schemes that I think could be gimmicky enough to throw some teams off. It's going to be more of an option approach, and I think that the staff changes and transfers should lead to a more impressive defense as well. Overall, I think that Vanderbilt will be improved due to their defense and possibly their tricky offense, despite losing most of their pass catching talent. It's a perfect team to run the option because of the lack of that wide receiver talent. So yeah, that's my list of all the teams in the SEC from best to worst, and a little bit of a breakdown of each team. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think I'll be doing the Big Ten next, so stay tuned, and thanks for watching.